Okay, so look, welcome to the second session for today. And we have 3 engaged training sessions, this being the second one, Communicate, which focuses really on the communication tool set available within Brightspace. Again, in the session subject site. And if I'm repeating some of the contextual sort of assumption-y type pieces of information we covered this morning, it's probably me covering my bases to make sure that we're all on the same page there, but I won't dwell overly long on them. I will give another acknowledgement of country, and I'd like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri, Ngunnawal, Gundungurra and Biripi peoples of Australia, who are the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which Charles Sturt's campuses are located, and pay my respect to elders both past, present and emerging. I won't talk too much about where the training sits. We did that this morning. Engages at the end. We're dealing in session subject sites, not master subject sites. The LMS principles underpin the work that's going on, and usually the way that we assemble subject sites in terms of interface and content. The Communicate session that we're looking at today really focuses in on, as I said, the communication tools available within the suite and looking at parity between what people might be familiar with in Blackboard and what we'll be using in Brightspace, and also looking at how those tools work between both the content and assessment, which are organized much more logically and are quite distinct within Brightspace, and how the communication tool set works alongside those areas. And we'll have a look at the types of learning data available as a result of those tools. I did mention in this morning's session the D2L online community website and the link that's there, which I am happy to drop into the chat again, simply because if there is any term in here that you're finding confusing or you'd like more information upon, just open up that website, drop it straight into the field at the top, and you'll get hundreds of knowledge articles in and around that tool that I can't go into that detail myself today. Continuing on, talk a little bit about context for this particular session. The one thing I really want to focus in on with Communicate is the distinction between the master subject site and the preparation that goes on within those. The prefix before the subject code showing that it is the master site where the preparation happens, M-, then the subject code, as opposed to the session site, which is where we're living for the engaged training sessions. We're within session subject sites, which are marked with the S- and the session code, and particularly because this is where the students get enrolled into. So in terms of communications, you would never be sending comms from a master subject site. It's all going to be happening within the session site because that's where the users have been enrolled. Earlier this morning, we did talk as well, and that's a fire alarm. So I have a fire alarm going off in my building right now. I'm not sure if you can hear that. I may check it out and see what that is. Just give me a moment. Sorry, I'll pause the recording.
No, definitely important.
Alrighty. So when we talked this morning about setting the scene with what we assume people are comfortable with in this space, that difference between coming in as an instructor as opposed to the learners in the site, the students, you are able to toggle your views and switch between instructor and learner view through your profile in the subject site. And that we are working predominantly within the subject session site rather than the master site, and that we're going to be having a play with the homepage and the widgets to do with communication in just a second. I have some assumptions in here that I'd like to unpack, and they're a bit more important in the communication context than what we were looking at with delivery tools. One of them being that content and assessment have been, am I sharing my screen? I am sharing my screen. Yeah, content and assessment have been provisioned at this point from the master site. A copy of that or a snapshot, as Amy said, has been provisioned out into the session subject site. But the assessment at this point may not have been deployed or linked. We do talk more about that in Engage Assess. That students will have been enrolled into the site and that you can check this by looking at the class list function. I'll show you where that is in a second. Discussion forums, you may have had their structure pre-created in the master site. And if you've done so, that will have been copied across in that snapshot, but there'll be no posts in there, no student posts. So it could be pre-existing, but if not, it'll need to be created at that point within the session subject site. Not everyone wants to pre-create their standard discussion forum structure within the master site. That's discretionary at that point. And also, obviously, that you've been added to the subject site so that you can have a look at that. All right. In the event also that you were looking for your own sandbox, for example, to be able to play around with some of the functionality outside of subject sites, staff have access to their own sandbox within Brightspace if you'd like one, and you can access that through Sherwell. And the ticket for that and the workflow where it says service requests, click on Brightspace, then click on Sandbox, is detailed on slide 12 of the deck. I'm going to get out of the slide deck in a second and work within the system itself, but that's where I wanted us to get up to before we started playing around in the system itself. So I'm now moving on to slide 14 and getting that off here, and then we can start playing around with the actual tools themselves. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is the subject homepage. So the session subject site, not the master, not M-, the session subject site, the homepage, and the communication tools that live in this space. When we first enter the session subject site, along the right-hand side is where we're going to find these tools. The first one, first and foremost, top right-hand side is the announcement widget. It's not the announcement tool, it's the announcement widget, which gives you a snapshot of what's been done within the announcement tool. And if that's not confusing, what you can do is hit the drop down that's next to the announcement widget, and it will open up the announcement tool itself. We'll break down what the announcement tool can do in just a few moments, but there's just a distinction between what's displayed within the widget itself, which is always just a shortcut to the main tool. And you can see here it's got a condensed version of the last announcement that I made up there. That real estate's probably important for you to keep in mind. If you're relying on the students getting kind of a full view of what's in there, they're not going to get it within the widget. They'll have to actually click on the title of the announcement and it'll open up the tool full size. But you'll see that any attachments, like I've got an embedded image in there that's come through. We've also got an attachment. The link is there available to them within the announcement widget. And also if there's been audio that's been created using either your headset or your webcam, that's also linked underneath. So you can see that as well within the announcement widget on the session subject site homepage. Scrolling down, we have another communication tool being the calendar widget, which again, hitting the drop down, it'll allow you to go to the actual tool itself. But within the widget, this is also referred to as a mini cal. It will show you the most pertinent upcoming events available. And you'll see chevrons that allow you to open up the actual mini calendar and then click on specific dates and events that have been entered in there. Either ones that you've created as the instructor or the students are able to add their own events and tasks into the calendar as well. And we'll play around with the calendar tool in today's session a little bit as well. The next communication tool available on the homepage is the activity feed. The activity feed really works as a space where you as the instructor can pin certain pieces of information permanently to your subject homepage. Whether that's content that you've created within your learning materials, or something that is not appearing within content for students, but you still want to be made available to them permanently as a post, that happens within the activity feed. And you can basically come into this tool and create new posts that will sit here indefinitely, as opposed to things like announcements, where it's always going to show the most recent one, for example. If you had something that was going to be continually of importance to students that you wanted them as a quick reference point to be able to come to that page and grab, you would use the activity feed for that. And we'll have a play around with that. But you can see here it just sits and lives on that homepage. And the last one that I'll get into here on the subject homepage is the welcome window widget. The way that this works is that you may be familiar with the content within your both master and session subject site. The first folder that's in there is called welcome. And that information, both the folder and the content items within it, is intended to be the very first thing that students will see when they come into the subject site. So the first thing is that you can't change the name effectively of these items. They need to contain the word welcome. It's got to stay there. But the welcome widget comes into play because what it will do is it will force new users to this subject site the first time they visit to have this pop up appear in front of them the first time they come into the site. So any content that's in that welcome folder, they will have to actually work through, scroll through, move to the bottom, and then dismiss so that they don't see that pop up again. So it will basically put that information in front of them first and foremost. So if you've got information that you've taken out of the subject outline or elsewhere that you want to put in front of the students and make sure that you know that they've read it the first time, it's going to pop up via this welcome widget. As long as they've scrolled through, they'll be able to dismiss it and not have that appear in front of them again when they jump into their subject sites. But the way the welcome widget works is until they've done that, they're going to get that pop up. That applies to staff as well. First time you go into the subject site, the welcome widget's going to be in your face showing you that content. All right, so this is what's available to you within the subject homepage itself. I'll stop there and see if there are any questions or commentary in the chat. Amy, anything going on there?
No, nothing at the moment. Just let me refresh that. Yeah, no, definitely nothing.
Okay.
So you'll just have to keep exercising that.
Yeah, get my glottis moving.
Oh, that's such a weird word.
Glottis, yeah.
Glottis.
All right. So look, I'm now looking at basically slide 15, which goes into a little bit more detail about the welcome widget itself for you if you're unfamiliar, but there are some ideas in there about what you might want to include in there. But our assumption really is there's part of the content preparation in the master site that you've already populated that area really. Maybe knowing how the welcome widget functions and that forces students to read through it might change some of the things that you put in there or not. But effectively, they are going to have to read through it. It won't disappear from them until they have scrolled through or worked through each of those items. One of the questions I quite often get about the welcome folder and widget is if you've got students in different cohorts, can you restrict who sees what? The answer is normally for content, yes, you can restrict who views what. The welcome widget isn't that. However, you need to make sure that it is generic enough that all cohorts can use it, because the widget basically will only work for the one set of content. So we can't separate it so that only certain groups can see certain pieces of material within the welcome widget. It has to be generic enough that it applies to all. As opposed to, for example, the subject outlines that we looked at this morning in delivery, they're only going to see the subject outline for their cohort. Okay, moving right along, let's have a play with the announcement tool. So I'm on to slide 16 in the deck. We find announcements in a couple of ways. We already looked at the announcement widget sitting on the landing page. So you could hit the drop down next to that and go to the announcement tool from here. You can also start drafting a new announcement from here as well. Another place to find it would be under the communication banner in the nav up top, announcements. And thirdly, if we're looking as well within course admin, if we can't find it anywhere else, we're probably going to be able to find it in here. And again, under communication, there's announcements there as well. So 3 ways to get to the same tool if you need to. But in most instances, we're figuring people will either launch it from their landing page, subject landing page, or going into communication and announcements. This will launch the actual announcement tool, which will give you the full view in this tabled kind of breakdown of all announcements that have ever been made within the subject zone. Okay, let's draft a new announcement. That'll give us a chance to actually break down what the tool can do. Clicking on new announcement, you can put that in there. Keeping in mind, as we get into this, scrolling down a little bit, we're going to be able to see things like release conditions, which will allow us to determine who gets to see it. So a lot of people usually want to jump straight to that. Like, how do I make sure that only students from particular cohorts get particular announcements? That happens here under release conditions. So I'm going to get to that definitely. But it is part of how the tool can work. So we'll put in a sample announcement. And in this case, I'm going to say, just for your benefit, only for Bathurst distance. We put in our content in here. It's got the same WYSIWYG, the Brightspace editor, which means that we can put in both text and external content using the insert stuff button. So that means we're going to be able to put in videos and other things. We can use our own webcam and audio if we want to add that to the announcement, to attach it. If you've got content externally in other places like YouTube or through links, etc., you can put those into the announcement as well. What I want to point out is that one of those assumptions we have about the announcement tool with the LMS is that students are going to be reading it probably on their phones, because it results in an email, comes through to them, they're getting it on their mobile devices, and they'll get it after the announcement has been sent. It comes through in that format. That's important because certain types of interactives and other content won't display within some mobile phone email readers. So whilst the students will always be able to come into the subject site and look at the announcement and see it in all its glory, in terms of their emails that they're getting through their phones and those sorts of notifications, not all media will display straight away like that. So if you're going to be embedding third-party content, etc., into your announcements, you need to be aware that they're not necessarily going to be able to view it straight away within their mobile phones. They'll have to come into the subject site. All right, so content for my announcement is going in here. Maybe I've put in interactives, maybe I haven't. Maybe you've got attachments that you want added to it. You can add those in underneath down here as well, whether they're files that you upload from your device or you're recording audio video, as I said. So there's multiple ways to do that, either using insert stuff or down here under attachments. Do you want the announcement to come at a particular time? Some academics are in the habit of pre-populating all of their announcements for the delivery of their subject, for example, all 12 weeks, 14 weeks, etc. They create them all in advance and set release dates and end dates, for example. Start and end date in this context is talking about when it's going to be visible to students first and when it will stop being visible to students. So I would only be using end dates ever if I wanted this to be not visible to students at any point in time. If you don't do anything, it's going to be immediate. So for example, I started drafting this today on the 10th at 11:20. That's why that start date is there. But if you want this to be released at some point in the future, you would change that start date and time to the point when you want them to get it. So that's the release of an announcement at a particular point. Attachments, then we get down to conditions. If I was to only want this announcement to go to Bathurst distance, I can then create a new release condition. And at that point, underneath these condition types that are in here, I should be able to move down to where it says class list, which is my users in the subject. And there is section enrollment in there. Choosing that, I can now choose which cohort of students I actually want this announcement to go to. So once you get used to that process, it'll be 2 clicks to get there, but you just need to be aware you've got to create that release condition. It's enrollment within a section, and then I choose which section I want to get it, and then create. And now at this point, it's telling me that this is only going to go out to students at Bathurst distance. I can either save it as a draft, which means it hasn't gone out, or I can publish and then it's going out to those students. So that email now is sitting as the most recent one within my full announcement list. If I looked at my dashboard, it's now going to sit at the top of my announcement widget, giving me a snapshot of what's gone through there. And I've even got a visual confirmation that it's gone out to under certain conditions. Right, so that's our announcement tool in a nutshell. We have a few options in there, like reordering where the announcements sit in the table if you were so inclined to want to reorder them. I don't know many people that would. There is an RSS feed option for those of you that are using an RSS feed reader and you wanted to subscribe to them. But to be honest, if either you or your students are using the Brightspace Pulse app, the mobile app, you would never actually subscribe in this tool. You just simply have the mobile app taking care of that for you. All right, I'm going to stop there and see, does anyone have any comments or questions about the announcement tool while I slurp on this coffee?
Yeah, feel free to speak. Oh, Kim came off mute. I'll be quiet.
Oh, she did. I was just making a comment that I would prefer to keep them in order of like date released. Is there any reason why you would change?
Honestly, I can't think of one, Kim. I really
No.
can't.
If there was something blindly obvious that I missed.
No, it's not. I mean, date release and
change.
newest to oldest to me sounds like a thing. I think it's because of that distinction between what people see on the homepage,
Sections.
and seeing it. Yeah, maybe sections. If you were reordering it so that you could only see all the announcements that went to Bathurst distance, for example, you could reorder in that way. Let's have a look. Reorder. And no, it doesn't allow me to sort by section anyway. It's literally only allowing me to determine the order that they appear within that table. So no, it's a valid point, Kim. Stay away from reordering. It makes no sense at all.
Yeah, no problem.
But you can see that it does give you the full announcement detail within the table, including anything embedded within it. So as opposed to those snapshot views within the widget.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, let's keep moving. We'll have a play with the calendar tool. And again, multiple ways to get to each of the objects. We looked at it from the home page for the subject. Again, my shortcut, clicking on the code there. I can find the calendar widget sitting down here. If I hit the chevron next to the widget, I can go to the calendar itself. Otherwise, I would also be able to find it within the subject site if I went to course admin. I'm sure I should be able to find the calendar in here. I can. Site resources, calendar. So you can find it in there as well. Let's go from the landing page. Calendar. Go to calendar. Okay. I want to say that the calendar tool itself is quite powerful and comprehensive, but you do need to get familiar with all of the different features of it. We didn't have a functional calendar within Blackboard, so a lot of people have gotten used to just not using it and doing things either in Outlook or in other places. The Brightspace calendar is integrated with the assessments, for example, and with anything that has a date condition set against it will appear to students and instructors within the calendar and that snapshot calendar widget, which is great, but people have kind of gotten out of the habit of using an integrated calendar tool within the LMS. So there's a bit of a change there. We'll have a look at some of its functionality in here. You'll see that you get this larger amount of real estate on the left there that you can see things in full. It means that you can filter what you're looking at in terms of events. An event is any piece of content that has a date condition against it. So as long as you're putting in dates, whether it's against part of your learning materials or you're adding in new events yourself via create event, it's going to appear as under this broad banner of events. How we categorize those or filter those is underneath. You can then choose to sort showing only things within this calendar that are assignments, for example, or that are checklists or discussion types, etc. You can put in all those filters or clear them if you need to. You'll find that there are ways to organize the calendar up the top here, either with a list view a view for the entire month. On the left-hand side there, it'll give you that more traditional view of items in there. Week by week, if you need to, where it's starting to give you time slots. Day by day. I'm seeing this potentially maybe as something that students may take advantage of, but for most of us, like professional staff, for example, at the uni, we're probably using Outlook to organize ourselves in this manner rather than the LMS tool. But I am very much interested in either a list view of tasks that I need to focus in on, or an agenda view as well, which will do the same thing, but I can stipulate how long I want that to be looking at. So if I was actually looking at a snapshot of things I needed to know about for the upcoming week, I'd probably use this agenda view. It's pretty handy. Let's create an event to go into our calendar. At that point, you're able to add in learning materials from your content, or you can add in just this brief information in here. New event for calendar or week X. The WYSIWYG's available there, but it's quite condensed, so you don't get to put in external content into this. Who gets to see it, for example, in terms of attendees, who's it relevant for? And again, your sections will be then visible there as well if you only want this to be appearing in the calendar of certain student cohorts. So if you've got multiple cohorts and you only want a calendar event to be appearing in some, you go into attendees and you choose which section you want to get it. Otherwise, it's going to everybody. And when do we want it to happen? All right, so let's pick a day. On Friday, I've got this thing happening. Okay, midday. Do I want it to be a recurring thing or only the one-off? Let's do it as a weekly recurrence that I want to happen every Friday. And it can happen until the 10th of Feb. Yeah, why not? We'll do it for the next 4. Location in this case would either be a physical campus location, or if you had a Zoom meeting or another meeting that you created and you had the URL, you could paste that in there as well. So this is going to appear in every student calendar inside the LMS each week, and they'll also have access to that hyperlink in there if we put one in. Link to the thing might go in here. All right, we create that. And it's been created. That's what it's telling us. And now if I was to look at my dashboard on the front page, we'll see that the events are going in here. New calendar events. They're appearing in there. That'll appear on the student dashboards as well. They can click on those to open them in full, but because you as the instructor have created the event, it'll appear in all of the applicable attendees or students' calendars as well, with as little or as much detail as you want for that to happen. Now you'll see here that I had previously created one that I was calling Weekly Zoom Tutorial. And a point that I usually make here is that with Zoom, for example, we do want students to be accessing Zoom through the LMS rather than just clicking on a link directly. We generally encourage them to come into online meeting Zoom because that will take their student login and give them proper access to the system and the recordings in that one location. If they were to click on a hyperlink somewhere else, like through an email or an announcement, for example, it doesn't verify that they're CSU students and there may be access issues. So we generally tell them, make sure if you come into the tutorial that you're accessing it through the communication menu, online meeting Zoom, with that particular example. Did I see a question go in there? I did. There's the calendar link to assessment due dates, or we enter them manually. Yeah, it absolutely will pick them up. Once the assessment has been set up, and its due date, it'll appear within the calendar for the students and the instructors as well on the subject side.
Excellent,
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, you don't have to enter those manually yourself. They will transfer across once the assessment due dates are set. That's a great question. And you can filter those using that filtering that we looked at within the calendar. All right, going back to our calendar view, we also have the ability to add what they call tasks. It's a bit hard to make a distinction here between a task and an event, except that a task is only for the individual. So Lachlan, the teacher, or Lachlan, the student, can click the drop down and have a look there. And if think of it as a checklist of things that you wanted to look at, you have the ability to then check those off and they'll remove them from your task list. Or you can create new ones, and you'll see that there's a distinction made there between an immediate task and a someday task. New thing, don't forget to do X. If I hit that, you'll see that it's added it as a checklist. I then have a drop down created for it, at which point I can establish a due date and a note with more information. These are gimmicky things, I know. Maybe we're not going to utilize them. Maybe students will, maybe they won't, but they can create their own individual task lists within the calendar tool. They can also then print those out if they need to. So I don't know. Was that something that you would utilize as a student, Amy, do you think, or not really?
The calendar, yeah, they've been asking for it. And that was one of the big things when the new student portal first came online. Everyone was very, very excited about being able to see at a glance where all their assessment stuff was, and it didn't end up performing that function. So I think that'll be one of the, for the students, that'll be a really big benefit. How much more simpler can it be if you look at it and you can see, oh, poop, that's that assignment I forgot was coming up, you know? Yeah, I think we've downplayed it a bit, but I think that'll be a big impact to student experience.
Yeah, I think it's the assignments will only appear in the calendar for both instructors and students once the gradebook has finished being set up. So when we talk about linking of assessment shells to the gradebook, part of that process involves both the weighting for the task and the due date. All of that happens within the session subject site, so we're in the right space, but they appear in there after that linking has been done. So yeah, prior to the start of session, it's a part of that setup. And maybe for the next session that we run for Engage as well, we might look to have some of those in place so that they can display in here. But to answer your question before, they absolutely do appear in here once that preparation has been complete. All right, any questions, comments, or other things on the calendar tool before we move on?
The other part of that question was, can they add them manually? Did you add things? Can the instructor add things manually to the calendar?
They can add.
If the assignment doesn't link in there itself, we could just add it just like you had done then, so that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and the other thing is you can add any new events yourself, whether they're accessible or anything else, into the calendars for all of your students, so that
sessions and stuff.
Yeah.
Stuff.
I'm not going to begin to try and list the million and one things that you may or may not want in your student calendars, but creating a new event in there will appear in all of their calendars unless you've set those restrictions that we talked about. Okay, let's have a look at the activity feed. We mentioned before on the subject landing page, subject homepage, that there was a little widget tool as we scroll down called the activity feed. I might condense some of this so that I can stop scrolling all the way. This is where it appears, the activity feed. There are two ways to access it. We do like to have multiple ways to get to things. One of them is that you can create a new post from the landing page here, at which point you'll get something like this appearing on every student's subject homepage. If, however, you have a piece of content that you want, or let's say a file or an object that you've made somewhere within the learning materials that you wanted to appear within the activity feed, it's very easy to do. So, for example, if I went into content, and let's say that I had a particular piece of information that sat within here, like this overview, which is just a standard Brightspace document, HTML document. If I go up to my three dots in the top corner here, I have the option to post to the course homepage. What that's saying is it's going to drop it into the activity feed. So if you've got something that you've already made in the content collection somewhere, whether it's visible or not visible to students, you have the option to come up and post it directly to the activity feed from here. That's one way to do it if it already exists. The other way is get rid of the calendar and that tab and too many tabs. Okay, activity feed, back to the activity feed. Here it is. I'm going to click on create a post here. And you'll see that it actually gives you this option to create an assignment from here. I'm going to advise you very, very strongly to steer away from ever doing that because our assessments are created in the master site and we marry them up from the subject outline. So we wouldn't, maybe a note that we can take, Amy, is to talk to the project team about potentially removing that function if it's not possible already, because we assign the assignment, create a post assignment from the activity feed, because that's going to give us nothing but trouble at that point. Okay, if we hit create a post message, however, you'll see that we have the option to make activity feed posts either for everybody, or we can in fact determine that it only goes to specific sections. So this is great. Again, we have the option to determine that, let's say that the Bathurst internal students all need some permission slip for something or whatever, but not everybody else. We can then have our activity feed posts specifically for them, or it could be for everybody. Message goes in here. You'll see that it has a condensed view of the WYSIWYG, of the content editor here on the right-hand side. It will take multimedia content, keeping in mind that tiny little activity feed window that's on the landing page. So they're not going to be able to view it in full anyway. So even though it lets you put in that type of media in here, unless it was things like attachments, etc., I would avoid using that. Put in activity feed post thing for students for the whole session. And then underneath, you have an option to either allow or disable comments from your students on that activity feed post. Do you want them weighing in on whether they think it's good or bad? Maybe save that for discussion board posts. But by default, when you turn that on, commenting is allowed. So I'm going to turn that off because this is sitting on my subject homepage and I really don't want students potentially seeing all the comments of all the other students on that page, good, bad, ugly, etc. So I'll turn off comments there. You'll see that there's an attachment function as well if you've got attachments that you want to go in there. And you can choose either to post it immediately to the subject homepage or release later and set a date and time period for it. I'm going to post it. It now sits underneath here, underneath the activity feed. And you'll see the most recent one sits at the top. There are multiples there. And the more that you create, the more that your landing page starts to grow as such. They can close the chevron or condense it a little bit, but by default, it'll just keep growing out underneath. And you can see that first one. I left comments on and hence it says 0 comments there underneath, which is, as I said, potentially a bit dangerous. Okay, that's the activity feed. Most instances, people were talking about that as having potential when you had students on work placements and other things where there were documents or templates that they constantly were asking for. Where do I find the thing for X? Now, you can put them into discussion forums, of course, absolutely. But if you have it on the landing page like this under the activity feed, it's going to be in their face as soon as they go into the site. So it might be of value to you in that sense. Okay, any questions, comments on the activity feed tool at all? Amy, have I missed anything in the byplay?
Sorry, I'm muted so you don't hear my random stuff going on around me, and I keep forgetting that, Yeah, no, I think that's yeah. I think you get that. I think he does an okay job. You haven't reported back that we need to get rid of you yet, so that's a good sign.
Nothing's broken just yet.
Just yet.
Okay.
Just me.
I will speak briefly about, again, about the Brightspace Pulse app for detail, particularly for your students. A lot of them will be getting this app. They access it if they haven't otherwise got it by going into notifications were underneath their profile settings. That will then open up that ad or that blurb telling you about being able to get the Pulse app via the App Store or the Google Play Store. And any of the notifications or communications tools that we're talking about today will result in the first instance with a notification through that app. So if they've got it, they're going to get pinged on their phone saying that there's a new activity feed update, or there's a new announcement from your lecturer about this subject, or a new discussion board post, for example. Any of the communication tools will result in a push notification coming from the Pulse app to the students if they have it. So you may want to encourage them to use that or not, but it certainly focuses in and around the communication tool set and making students aware of any updates in that space. So we usually give that a fairly decent plug because of that integration. All right, let's have a look at the discussion board tool. That's one area of communication that people generally have an interest in and how that functions. Multiple ways to get there, but you're either going to be finding it under communication, discussions, or under course admin. And we will get to that under communication discussions. It's here as well. All right, so let's go in here the way the students are going to, communication discussions through here. And as I mentioned earlier, right at the beginning, that if you've pre-created your standard discussion forum structure and how you're intending for it to be used, that's going to carry across from the master site into the session subject site when we do that snapshot, but it won't have any student posts within it. Then once you get in here and students start contributing to it, they will stay contained within the session subject site. They have no impact or bearing on the master subject site. If you've used discussion forum tools in the past, the Brightspace tool works very much the same way. You'll find that you have the ability to create separate forums, threads within those forums, and then posts within those threads. It's a standard discussion forum hierarchy. Brightspace does do a very good job of separating out how the cohorts do or do not work with each other. But I would suggest in the first instance that if you want to separate out students from different cohorts, create forums for those sections rather than or posts, thread areas that you're intending for specific cohorts to be able to use. And we'll have a look at how that works here. If I was to create a new, and you'll see the option I've got here is either forum or topic, forum being the entire container for a whole series of topics, or a topic within an existing forum. If I click on topic, it's going to ask which forum I want it to live within. At this point, it'll ask for a title, but just for these people. And if I was saying BD, for example, if you're looking to make a discussion forum post accessible, our expectation is obviously that they would be in the subject outline, and hence the grade center columns would be created for that. Creating the actual accessible discussion forum thread should have happened within the master subject site. But when we get to the point in the session subject site where we're marrying those up, that's the point at which we move in here and start changing grades to put in grade values. And we would then also be joining it up with an existing column. I don't really talk about linking in this particular session, but that's how that works. Basically, you've pre-created an accessible discussion forum thread, and that we will then join it to the column that comes through from the subject outline. Right, so text in here. So this is a description for the topic, keeping in mind that the students would then be responding with their own threads or posts to that topic. All right. As with most Brightspace items, when we create new content items, you have the ability to toggle visibility for that to the students. With discussions, it is visible by default, not invisible, but you can certainly toggle that backwards and forwards if you're not comfortable making it available to them straight away. Then we get into some customization settings for your discussion settings. So do you want it to be released straight away, only visible within certain date periods or not? Otherwise, it's just visible based on that toggle. Then we get into release conditions. Release conditions is when we get into whether or not students need to have completed something else before they can do it. And then underneath that, we have our restrictions. So restrictions is when we deal with our sections or our cohorts. Do I want to restrict this topic by a particular group or a section? And at that point, I could turn that on and say, actually, I want to restrict this topic. I want to restrict it to a particular section. I want to restrict it just to this section. That's how that works. At that point, only students for that particular cohort will be able to see this particular discussion forum thread. So the sectioning really works in our favor once the students have been enrolled into the session subject zone. Then we have some settings underneath about how we want the post to be completed, whether or not we have any requirements in there, such as anonymous posting. It's off by default, so we see who's putting their posts in there. I think there may even be some policy considerations in there about students being able to post anonymously or not. Do we want students to have to add their own content before they can see other content? Sometimes that's a requirement for certain types of learning activity. You want them to do the post first before they can see everybody else's. And do you want moderation happening? Do you want to have to approve posts before you allow everyone else to see it? Those options are there underneath completion settings. And then we get into evaluation and feedback, which really comes more into whether or not you're creating accessible discussion forum threads. And at which point, that's when you're getting into things like rubrics and even turning on the option for learners to rate other people's posts. Again, I'll say it, if it was an assessment item, our expectation is that you would have already created it within the master's site rather than in the session site itself. These same settings you would engage with then when you were preparing the master. All right, so I've created a post, in this case, for the Bathurst distance students. I've made it visible to them. I'm going to save and close. It didn't like the fact that I left that as ungraded. Number must be greater than. Well, I don't want to make it gradable. Let's say reset to ungraded. There we go. Save and close. Okay, so at that point, I have added in a new topic for students only with a particular group of students, but it's down here underneath standard topic, but only for those people. So it hasn't situated it within another forum. It's created it out on its own. So that means that we have to go diving within a particular forum that pre-exists in here before we start creating new threads and new topics. So sometimes you have to remember to go into a particular area or container within the discussion forum before you start creating your topics within there. You can reorganize them and rearrange them if you need to, but it's usually easier to just start by going into the particular forum and topic area before you start creating your content. I think I'm going to need to prepare a quick guide, particularly around discussion forums. Amy, I better add that to the list of things to do because there's a lot more to go into there than we can cover today.
Definitely.
I'll stop there and see if there are particular areas of discussions or anything else that we've been talking about today that either Kim or Sam would like to talk about or unpack or not. Or are
I'm
we
all
all
good,
good?
thanks.
All good? Okay,
Yeah,
great.
no, I'm all good, thank you.
I think forums are really interesting how they've been used in the university previously, aren't they? And how they can potentially be used moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about some of my own online learning experiences over, the past sort of, I don't know, 2 decades or something, I feel that use of discussion forums has really kind of, iterated. I don't know about evolved. Let's just say that it's changed. Once upon a time, it was a pretty standard thing to be asking participants in a subject to contribute weekly, basically almost replacing that idea of going into a tutorial and participating in a tutorial in that way. They were getting discussion forums in online subject sites to be engaged with every week. So
and especially
read,
for online
discuss,
students, right?
Yeah.
And the other interesting part of it, when you start to dig down into that, is that there's a whole generation in university and coming into university now that their main mode of communication is text, be it, Discord servers or text, literal texting and stuff like that. And they're a lot more comfortable reaching out to staff via those mediums rather than the traditional picking up a phone or knocking on a door. So one of the things coming from my olden days background in Student Central, there was a contrast between the responsiveness of different parts of the university in the forum areas. And I know that students as a whole wanted more engagement in those areas, so because they could post their question at midnight and then, when they thought of it, and then hopefully someone would get back to them. So yeah, I think if we can encourage everyone to buy in, it's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean,
this comes into your e-learning background stuff. Hey,
yeah, a little bit.
This really, yeah,
a little bit. I think the is that when not all the tools are set up to integrate properly, and in that case, we did have that going on with Blackboard and I2 for quite a long time. It sort of simplifies how people use the tools, and the discussion boards are no different. And in a lot of cases in I2, people just ended up using them as a repository for backup information or students with problems, essentially, right? So they'd create a forum with inquiries. Yeah. And they didn't necessarily have a link to the sequence of learning that was intended. So they weren't sort of saying, right, this week we want you to do this in the discussion board and post and contribute. Like a lot of people still do that. But I saw lots and lots of instances where the only use for the discussion board was questions around assessment X, Y, Z, and student problems. Otherwise, we'll talk about it in the Zoom meeting. You'll see it in your announcements. Other tools serving those different functions,
It has a pretty strong place as a reinforcing tool as well, which is interesting. Yeah. Anyway, let's not go down that rabbit hole of conversation.
All right. Well, look, I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes if people have particular questions, but otherwise, Sam and Kim, thank you for joining us today, and I'll stop the recording there. But we look forward to seeing you at future sessions.
Brilliant. Thank you.